I'm the motor oil geek, and I've got a lot of experience doing US based products. And of course, we did distribute our products all around the world. So I'm familiar with all the ACEA specs, but the reality is, the European ACEA specs weren't something that we were having to worry about, at Joe Gibbs Racing. We were developing racing oils and things like that. So as opposed to me trying to speak from my limited knowledge and experience developing those specs, I'm like, wait, let's just get some people that actually know what the heck they're talking about, because this is what they live and they do every single day, and can provide that perspective. Because hey, these guys, they're in Germany, so they're giving up part of their Saturday afternoon to come spend time with you folks and to provide some data and some clarification on this subject. So let's go ahead and bring them on. All right. So here we go. Colton and Alexander, how are you guys doing this morning or afternoon in Germany, right?
Good afternoon, exactly. It's 3 o'clock here right now. And yeah, Lake, first of all, thanks for having us in your show. Absolutely amazing. I'm Koljan. I'm leading the export sales department at Ravenol since 2011.
Very nice.
Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. Thanks for having me, Lake. It's a great opportunity. And hi to all in the audience. So I'm part of the development team at Ravenol. So not sitting at the same place as Koljan, more in the northern part of Germany. But I've hands-on experience with touching the oil and mixing it together. So I hope I can be helpful.
He makes the magic.
That's always
happen.
a good thing, right? Yeah. Because then you've actually seen the stuff like, hey, this doesn't sound like a really good idea to put this component and that component together until you actually put them together in the beaker, and it turns into a big gelatinous mess. And you're like, don't do that anymore.
Yeah, actually, it can happen if you put the wrong stuff together. Yeah.
Absolutely. We even come across one thing. There's a couple components like you can put them together in the oil, but they can't be back to back. Like they have to be spread out. And it always made it tricky in the blending plant, because like there's going to be residual in the pipes, and like all of a sudden it'll start to like build up that same gel in the pipes, and it changes flow, and it's a mess. And they're like, can you just not use that? Find something else that can do that job. You're like, okay.
We really try. We really try. But the problem is that it's mostly the two very key components. So
it's always something that does exactly what you want it to do. Then this other one here is like, it's a mess, But so just so everybody understands, and we again appreciate everybody from showing up. We're literally from around the world for this. We're going to talk about the differences between, the American API specs and the European ACEA specs, and some of the European OEM specs, and how those kind of relate together. And we've got a presentation that we're going to kind of walk through. But the key thing that when we first started talking about this, that I think is really important, because most conversations about choosing an oil tend to begin in the wrong place, in my opinion. And that normally starts with people trying to pick a brand, or this product has this viscosity index, or it's got these certain specs on the spec sheet, physical properties, and they get really enraptured with that, and they want to go that direction. But that's kind of like putting your cart before the horse, because what you really got to do is you got to start with what is the vehicle, what is the application, and that application is then dictate what the appropriate chemistry is. Then you can pick the brand, and all that goes from there. And the thing that when we were first talking about this, that really stood out, and I feel like this is where most people misunderstand the fundamental difference between the American API specs and the European ACEA specs, is the fact that the primary fuels that are used, and some of the fuel formulations, are different in the US versus Europe. And Alex and you guys, if you're okay with it, let's just kind of jump in to the presentation, because I feel like if we can bring in this fuel part, and let's jump back to the right part, it helped if I prepared myself a little bit better here, right? Because one of the key things, and this is the stat that I heard, and you guys can kind of tell me if I'm off base on this, that in Europe, there's like, on a percentage basis, of the car park, like 5 times more diesel engines than in the U.S. Does that number sound about right, or kind of verify what you guys see?
Definitely, Europeans love diesel. That's true. Here in Germany are definitely way more diesel than in the US. Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah, and I think this is the fundamental part. Yeah, that people don't understand is that, one, there's that mixture, right? Diesels are more popular on a percentage basis in Europe than they are in the US. So when Mercedes, for example, is building a car, they're going to have both gasoline and diesel options on that car. And the reality is there's not a lot of gasoline and diesel options on, say, a Corvette. You're going to get a gas engine. You're not going to get a diesel option, but this is something that's pretty common in Europe. So this understands, because the fuel that you're using in that type of engine is going to dictate the oil chemistry. And we'll get into that a little more later, but just something so everyone understands is that even in the US, gasoline isn't the same from, say, California to North Carolina. This map just shows all of the different base gasoline blends just across the US. So if gas isn't even the same in the US, what's even a bigger piece on this is that diesel fuel isn't the same all around the world. So you can see that in the US and Canada, we have ultra low sulfur diesel, which is, less than 15 parts per million. But then when you look over in the European map, well, most of Europe is ultra low sulfur diesel. But there are some places in Europe, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, that there's even less than 10 parts per million on the sulfur. But then there's other places that are, over 15. Some places are even higher. And of course, if you kind of look and say, okay, well, there's Germany kind of on the center of the map in Europe, but the same cars built in Germany aren't just going to stay in Germany. They're going to end up in North Africa, in the Middle East. And you can see that the sulfur content in some of those places is over 5,000 parts per million. And what impact does that have on the engines and the fuel and the oil when you have that big a swing in sulfur content, guys?
If maybe I would answer and then put it maybe one step further also. So the main problem with all sulfur is always that it tends to form like acidic components,
right?
And you have to deal with all the acids in which is leaking in the oil through the combustion chamber. That's quite normal, and when we expected to do it, and you need certain oil formulations to cope with all the acidic parts. So if you deal with a high sulfur content, like in Africa, for example, you have to drastically alter the oil change intervals. But maybe Koljan can also talk a little bit more about his experience in the export business. For us in the development, it's more like, okay, can we top treat some oils for specific markets to make it more viable within the oil change intervals? So that's one consideration. And when you push it further away from cars or trucks and go to like the shipping industry, there you would alter the whole oil system, all the oil which is in use, to the used fuel, because they don't use diesel fuel. That would be top tier. They mainly use like very heavy crude oil stuff to burn in this big container vessels, and they have to have to reformulate on the behalf of the type of fuel which they are using to run the engine smoothly. And then that's mainly the bare diesel quality. And then you have to factor in the biogenic content, which is also a thing which is getting more and more important, especially in Germany. We are it's called B7 fuel for diesel. So you have like 7% biodiesel in the fuel mixture. And when you go to the opposite side, you have like HVOs, the synthetic diesels, which are similar to normal diesel, but also completely different in the kind.
Yeah, from point of sale, I can just say that, of course, such countries with very high sulfur content in the diesel fuel are, of course, nice markets from point of sales. Because
you sell a lot more oil, you got to change it a lot more
because
often.
It shortens the oil change intervals dramatically. So there are countries in North Africa or in other countries where we have high sulfur content where they change regularly by 3,000, 4,000 kilometers. And there are definitely countries where the people, the consumers, are spending more cost on the oil changes than on the gasoline or on the diesel itself. So
yeah, and that's just frank conversation about that, and that's because what you mentioned is that high level of sulfur ends up creating strong acids, so sulfuric type acids, which, for people that are very familiar with the terms, total base number TBM, that there are detergents in the oil that can be over-based, that's the technical term, to neutralize those acids. And so, but they can only last so long. And that's one reason why I see it in the chat over there. So trying to answer some questions in the chat at the same time, a little bit, that's why you see higher calcium levels typically in the European oils versus the API oils, is because that calcium sulfonate detergent typically is over-based. It can provide that acid neutralization. It'll bump that TBN up higher, which will allow that oil to better deal with the higher sulfur fuel. And that's something that's pretty common, is that, so that it's that balancing act, like you said, of what's the application and how do you deal with these different things. And that's one of the things that the European manufacturers, they have to deal with. They know that these vehicles are going to be exposed to this wide range of sulfur levels in the fuel. So when they're developing the oil, they're developing it with a global mindset, not a market specific mindset, which I think we typically see in the US. So I think that's one of the fundamental differences that I think most people don't understand, that's the underlying piece here that's driving these changes. So let's pop this back up here, because that's one thing, right? Is just the sulfur levels. And that, to me, that's probably one of the biggest pieces. And Alexander, you hit on the biodiesel part too, right? And I feel like as everybody is watching, as we get later in the presentation and we start getting into the ACEA engine testing specs, you're going to see some of this stuff show up, right? And what I'll do is in the chat at the end and in the description on the video, I'll leave a link to a document that's put out by Infinium that has all of the current, the 2024 ACEA test sequences. You can go in there and you can see all the stuff. Because it's very detailed for those who want that extra little geek out session on that. Other piece to keep in mind, besides just diesel, is that even the petrol and the gasolines, right? We're probably going to use petrol and gasoline interchangeably here for U.S. folks. Just know that when we mean petrol, being gasoline, everybody else, you already know what we're talking about. That you've got 99 octane, and that's the premium fuel. And you've got the 95 octane, and this is from a pump in the UK a couple of years ago. It's 95. Now, of course, the E10, so the lower octane one, is the higher ethanol content, and then the petrol 99, the premium, is only 5% ethanol, which is kind of different because in the US everything's 10% ethanol. I know that the pumps say up to 10%, but if you look at the government information, we are using more than 10% across the country ethanol in the total fuel blend. So the Energy Information Administration publishes data on what the bio content is and the ethanol content is in fuel across the U.S. So it's over 10%, right? I mean, we've got the E15s, you got the E85s, and some of that will push it up. But the reality is, regular pump gas in the U.S. pretty much has 10% all the time. Now, here's the thing that most people miss when they see these octane ratings of 95 and 99. That's just the RON. That's not what we see here. So when we see pump fuel in the US, it's the research octane number plus the motor octane number divided by 2. So if you see that on this example right here, premium 93 in the US, this is some actual fuel we ran at Southwest Research a couple of years ago, that it was 98.3 RON, 88.4 MON. That ended out being a 93.4. So it's possible that our premium fuel here can still be, 1 or 2 octane numbers lower than what the fuel in Europe is. So just to go back real quick, because I've done a little bit of this. So a 95 octane regular fuel, most 87 octane gasoline is going to be maybe 94, probably going to be around 93, 92 octane RON. So the research octane number is going to be higher on the fuels in Europe, and that's what's advertised on the fuels in Europe versus what's in the US. So it's just a little bit different, right? And so for the people who aren't familiar with what research octane, motor octane are, there's this old school machine. It's the single engine or single cylinder carbureted engine that runs, and it literally listens for the knock. And you can see the test conditions, and we won't go too deep into all this, but if you guys want to see it, that the research octane number runs at a lower RPM but higher air temperature, where the motor octane number runs at a higher octane, but the mixture temperature is a lot higher. And what they're looking for is got variable compression, and basically they're just listening for the knock, and that's where they run it up to it, and you hit it, and here's a whole bunch of different fuels, and you can kind of see the difference between the motor octane and the research octane on all those to get an idea. And just for the little fun fact before we jump into oil, because I promise we are talking about oil, I'll just talk about fuel the whole time, is that the 0 octane reference fuel is what's called N-heptane. And you can see that it's basically just a straight chain of carbon and hydrogen. But iso-octane is the 100 octane reference fuel. And it's just H's and C's as well, but it's branched. So it's the branching that actually makes the fuel a higher octane. So you could actually substitute N-heptane for octane. So iso-octane is branched. That's an isomer for chemical terms. But straight octane is just a 1 carbon length longer than N-heptane. So that's just a little bit of something there to kind of a little bit of geek out about fuels on a Saturday morning here in the US before we jump into the fun part, which is, so what are these differences, right? Okay, I had one more slide. I forgot about that. Just for people that don't know, your base fuel in the US, that 87 octane gasoline, in the pipeline is 83 octane gasoline. Because when you put in 10% ethanol, it bumps it up to 87. And the same thing with 93, that it's usually 91 octane. And again, that's research plus MON divided by 2. That's how it happens. So anyway, we're done with our little interlude about fuel, so that everyone understands fuel a little bit and how much variance there is in fuel, because that variance in fuel is the primary driver on what's going to influence these differences in engine oil testing, because this is the real crux of the matter. So with that little setup, what do you guys want? What would you say is the best place to start in really looking at the differences between API and ACEA? What are the technical differences?
From my point of view, in the research development department, it's kind of, yeah, for sure, the testing, but you have to test quite a lot in both sequences.
Mhm.
But I would say the focus of testing and the branching.
Okay.
But we will get to that when we specify how API and the ACEA are splitting up into different categories. And then
this is probably one of the key
yeah.
things to kind of talk about, right? Is that you're talking about API, right? We're talking about the American Petroleum Institute. There's the guys that do the little donut on the bottles,
Yeah.
right? And what they do is they really break up the oil specifications into two classifications. You know, the S category, which is basically for gasoline engines. Then you've got the C category, which is really for diesel engines. And that's not the way it's done with ACEA, right? When you look at the ACEA specs, well, other than the E category, right? The A, the B, and the C are really for both, petrol and diesel engines, correct?
C is for diesel engines, yeah.
Yeah, because E is basically just heavy duty diesel engines.
Actually, we have entered the phase where you get like a 4 split in the ACEA. So if you have the AB specs for gasoline, you have the C specs for passenger car diesel, you have the E specs, the legacy heavy duty, and then the newest addition would be the F specs for fuel economy heavy duty trucking. So
okay,
there's something similar in the API C categories, really down the rabbit hole. But
yeah. So like the within the CK, they have a lower a fuel economy version. The FA, I think they call it, right?
Yeah.
So the FA would kind of be along the line with the F series for the diesels for the better fuel economy. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But
So
for passenger cars, we have like the AB categories and then the C categories, which are not that important in the API, I would say, because you don't have that many diesel cars. So that's the first point you make, and then you can see that pushing through in the governing bodies, I would say.
got it. Yeah. So like just for like familiarity, if you look at the API, the S series, the current one is SQ, which just came out earlier this year, but pretty much most of the oils on the shelf, because I check every Sunday when we go to the store to go grocery shopping. I bug my wife. I go over there and I start flipping bottles looking for SQ. I finally found the first couple of SQ ones last week. First one I saw on the shelf was Motorcraft, which there's a reason for that, and we'll get into that maybe some other day. Not this morning. We won't go sidetrack, but the SQ really hasn't hit the shelves with force yet. But the reality is API, SP, and SQ, they're very similar. So SQ is basically just a kind of a tightening of some of the spec limits. It's not really a wholesale change, where API, SP was a wholesale change in what the tests were. The API completely redid, what engine tests they had, added new tests that weren't ever before, from SN, right? And SN plus was kind of a mid gap, step, because obviously the low speed pre-ignition was a really big deal. And that's where moving to SP and bringing all of this on was able to because but really because in the U.S. turbocharged engines weren't very common until the last 15 years, right? You guys have been using turbocharged engines for decades, right?
Sure. Small engines, turbocharged, in fuel economy, it has definitely an impact. So my Mercedes C200, I can drive it on 4.5 liters with 200 horsepower. So it definitely makes fun.
Yeah,
and with our high fuel cost, it makes sense, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the smaller engines, higher horsepower, density type thing, that's been more of the European approach for a long time. And that's what's kind of brought about some of these changes as the US has gone that route. Now we started to see, hey, wait, there's some pretty big differences here. And we got to address that, right? And I think that's an important piece for that. So that's where API SP and that stuff comes in. Of course, like we said earlier, you split over to the diesel side with API, and it's different. And now we're looking at, pretty common things today are we have DPFs and, particulate filters, on the engines, the EGR systems. So we're seeing lower levels of sulfated ash. So Alexander, talk a little bit about how that base formulation for a diesel really changes when you have all these, after treatment devices on the engines compared to the legacy engines without them.
That's mainly where I would suggest you, as I see it, you don't have in the API in the US, you don't have the split into like after treatment compatible engine oils,
right,
and legacy before that. Kind of. It's coming with the newer sequences, I would say, and then the C categories you had it on the slide already with the -4. So in Europe we had the distinction between the SAPS content, so sulfur, sulfate ash, phosphorus, and sulfur in general, where the trend is to go down in the SAPS content to better meet the requirements for the diesel after treatment systems. And
right,
you have that too with the -4 categories on the C line of API CK4, for example.
Yeah.
So you go down in the SAPS level to protect all the after treatment systems from getting too much ashes from burning oil residue, kind of.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things is that what I really like about the ACEA specs is, like you said, you've got this category that's kind of divided out, by the chemical natures of the fluids, and they just keep updating them versus where API, you've got gas, you've got diesel, and every new spec is backwards compatible. And that's always tough, right? That's just a tough thing to pull off, and that's where, it's an issue because those higher SAPS oils are going to be harder on all the after treatment devices. This is the way it works, right? We see it quite often, that sometimes customers will go out with, let's say with the oil analysis part, what I see is people will go out and they'll put in, their higher SAPS oil because in their mind, they feel like, well, this high SAPS oil, more zinc, more phosphorus, sulfur, all these things, higher additive content, it's going to be better protection for my engine. But then what happens is that high level of particulate in the oil, because that stuff doesn't burn.
Yep.
It loads the DPF. It leads to more frequent DPF regens. And of course, the way the DPF regens is by dumping more fuel into the exhaust. Well, most of those designs are dumping the fuel through the engine first to get to the exhaust. It's not uncommon to see 5%, 6, 8, 9% fuel dilution in brand new engines, very new engines, because they're running the wrong oil because of the DPF regen frequency. And when you can really bring down and get the soot level, but the SAPS level right, now all of a sudden the engine, comes back and begins to run normal again. And because it's like, you think you're helping yourself here, but you're actually hurting yourself over there.
Yeah. And in Europe, you have the extra special situation that it's not a trucking problem as in the US. So in the US, it's mainly a problem for the big rigs, for something like Cummins diesel something. In Europe, we had like diesel cars from VW for decades. So
Right.
so they had to come up with the solutions in the passenger car market, and they had the problem. You have to you imagine you are like BMW, Mercedes, or VW, and you are selling a lot of petrol cars, and you're selling, on the other hand, a lot of commuter diesel cars for longer distances, or the company cars, mainly diesel, because the people using these cars, mostly doing a very long drives with them. So you have always this mixed fleet of petrol and diesel in the same body with a similar sized engine. And the companies, especially the big ones, don't want to frequently change different oil types between their fleets. So the goal is, okay, can I get one oil formulation which fits all my engines? And I don't have to upgrade it like in a year, but it will get in like for the next decade, it will stay this way.
And that's, I think,
504, 507, for example, right?
Yeah, like that, right? This is what we're trying to do, right? We want one engine that can work, or one oil that can work in everything we have, just to be safe. And that makes it really tricky, because now that oil has to run across a bunch of different tests, right? It has to pass both gasoline tests, it has to pass both diesel tests. And so I know you sent over some slides here that kind of went through what are these tests. So do you want to run through these real quick?
We can do that.
Let's see where we want to start. So here's kind of an overview, right? So we were kind of talking through this, is that, obviously in the US, we've got a little bit different things here. Obviously gasoline and diesel, we talked about that split. So when we get into the technical differences, obviously what we kind of touched on as well is that there's definitely more turbochargers. The DPFs and things have been around longer in Europe than in the US, so that the understanding the SAPS, which is something that's newer, right? I think that's SQ is the first time where we're limiting the sulfur content in engine oil or in gasoline oil.
I just maybe to slip in there right from that point. You were doing that since APESN, I would say, kind of, in the 5W30 grade.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
but only there.
Right. Yeah. So now we've kind of spread it out to like, oh yeah, it's kind of been existing right here. We kind of we semi-technically limited it. Now we're actually putting a real limit on it for the first time.
It's just for us, we as a development team, we kind of frequently get the request to formulate like a basic oil which meets API and ACEA categories. And the most frequently asked for is API like SP or SN or SQ for the future, and then combined with the ACEA A3B4.
Okay.
And on the 5W30, and that's not impossible, but close to.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's like, how are you going to hit that TBN and
yeah,
be able to pass.
yeah. And then you have from the API, you get a very strict phosphorus limit. So it's the only since SN, I would say, you have like for the 5W30, you have an 800 ppm phosphor
800
cap.
max, yeah, and that's since SM, yeah.
And the ACEA A3B4 starts at 800. So the only way which you can satisfy both categories if you go exactly to 800,
100,
then you need on top of that a high calcium level, which is kind of weird to do, and have to meet all the high-end API SN wear protection steps.
Yeah.
And the A3B4 wear protection. And it's messed up.
Right. It's just it's very challenging and probably not actually the best blend, right?
Yeah. There are formulations out there, but they are usually quite expensive.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So let's bring this back up so we can kind of talk through this. So we're kind of hitting on that, and that's the one does play back into the drain removal expectation, right? I can tell you right now, just from the oil analysis data, we see that most of our customers, at least on the oil analysis side, they're changing their oil right around 5,000 miles, right? So there are people who go less, there are some people who go more, but most of that's going to be right around that 5,000 miles. Where in Europe, you guys are typically seeing a lot longer drain removals than that, right? You're seeing 10K and further on a lot of those things.
So it depends a little bit. Yeah. So usually 20 to 30,000 kilometers are possible, but I would say everybody also here in Germany who loves their car, they also change on a more frequent level. So
yeah, quite common.
If you love your car, you change a little bit earlier.
Quite common would be 15 or every year.
Once a year, 15,000 is quite common. Yeah, depending on how much you love your car.
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously, fuel economy targets have changed on both sides, right? Everyone's focusing on better fuel economy, and then the emission systems capability. I think that's what you guys already kind of really hit on, the fact that you've got like the C class, where it's really focused on diesel particulate filters and these things to try to drive things down, and that's something that is newer, we'll call it, for the U.S. market than before. Just a real quick run through of the API sequence test, and then we can let you guys cover the ACEA sequence test. Is that when you're looking at, say, 3H, which is your high temperature deposit test, right? So that's one that runs the engine at really, really high temperatures, and it will build up piston deposits and varnishes and things, on the valve covers and timing chain set. So that's something that's really looking for that. Then you've got the 4B, which is your valve train wear test. That was a very interesting test development-wise. We can maybe talk about it some other day. So that's one of the valve train wear tests. Then you got the 5H, again, another sludge and varnish test. Then you got the Sequence 6, which is fuel economy. Sequence 8, which is just a legacy test. It's bearing wear. Then the two newest ones really are the Sequence 9 and Sequence 10, and these are the ones that are addressing the low speed pre-ignition and timing chain stretch. And one of the technical changes for SQ is that SP only looked at the new oil in terms of its low speed pre-ignition tendency. Now we're also with SQ looking at used oil. So what they can do, or what the process is you actually will run a Sequence 9 timing chain, or the Sequence 10 timing rate change test, then use that used oil to then run the Sequence 9 LSPI test. So it's using the same engine, but you can just age the oil and then use that used oil to then rerun the test. And that's one of the reasons for doing this, is that what was discovered by some of the OEMs is that certain oil formulations that would pass and do quite well knew once the oil was aged, all of a sudden didn't do so well anymore. So they needed to have a way to screen for chemistries that really wouldn't hold up long term in the field. And that's one of the main drivers for that change on that side with LSPI. Any other comments from you guys before we dive into the ACEA specs and how they're, or it's the ACEA engine tests?
Maybe just one focus shift, because you've gone through all the different engines which are used, or the assessment for the test. I find it quite obvious what has changed when you look at sequence 9 and 10. Then you go down from like the 4.6 or 3.6 liter and go down to the 2.0 liter GDI turbocharged. That's, yeah, we will see that in the ACEA spec. We have similar tests
Right.
on quite similar engines, but on the diesel side as well, and they are much older as the Ford 2.0 GDI, I would say.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, like, I say the engine size, the previous SN spec still had the 3.6 liter Buick V6 that was the engine that was used for the valve train wear test, right? So the 3G was the previous test on that, and it was decades old engine that wasn't in service, and that was the biggest problem. Is there a lot of these engines were these older, larger, V6, V8 engines that really had no relevancy to what the modern engines were. So that was a big upgrade, is getting everything where it needs to be, right? And then when you start looking at the ACEA test, and it's completely different makeup, right? Because now we're looking at a whole bunch of gasoline and diesel engines mixed together.
Yeah. Yeah, when you have a look, all the engine sizes in itself will go down. So you have like 1.6 liter, or I think the 271 Evo is like a 2 liter diesel, something like that. No petrol. The OM LA on the CEC L99 test is also like quite small for a diesel engine, but all like turbocharged engines, and all quite small. And we had like a shift in the latest ACEA categories. So some legacy engines went out of the sequence because they are like 30 years old or something. Yeah, the same for the API. And some new tests with much more modern engines are like were put in, especially for the new C5 and C6 categories. You won't see so much changing in the legacy A and B categories, I would suggest. But I would have to check the sequences over the years. But there are not that many changes. The main focus was on the diesel side, on the C categories.
Right.
Diesel side is also not really true anymore, I would say. So we run like C3 oils in nearly every petrol engine from a German manufacturer, I would say.
Got it. Oh yeah, back to here now. So
yeah.
And that's kind of basically what you were just talking about, is that obviously in Europe, for a longer period of time, it's been smaller, more fuel efficient engines. And obviously the hybrids and plug-ins, and that's all coming in and changing the mixture, both here and there. I think one of the things, and I've mentioned this in other videos and stuff in the past, but I think your experience, Alexander, would be probably even more appropriate for this, is that one of the key challenges, and let's say it right here, because it's right here, right, with the sludge test, right?
Yeah.
Is sure. That diesel engines produce soot.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing when you're formulating the oil to deal with. Explain that a little bit.
You have to get this somehow under control. So you have to
Yeah.
you have to use a certain additive components to get the soot bonded to the used oil, I would say, to get it out of the system when you change the oil. And then the system has to run also like 20 or 30,000 kilometers long drain intervals. So, and you can't have that with classical like calcium sulfonates, over-based detergents, which would function to catch all the debris and all the stuff you don't want to have in the oil, but that would lead to like blocking of the DPF. So you can't have
exactly,
that.
yes.
And when you go and when you go even further than that, then you can't have the calcium components because you have now the LSPI problematic. So that's also
where you get into some of these really tricky viscosity index improvers. So like you're saying, if you just relied on, say, the calcium-based detergent, you'd run into other issues. So now you're having to be a little more blended with, maybe you bring in some magnesium so you get your TBN. But then for the dispersancy, the soot control, you're going to have to probably use what's called a functionalized viscosity index improver. So a traditional, like at least in the US, like most API licensed products are going to contain what's called an olefin copolymer, an OCP type viscosity index improver. They have a good amount of lift for the treat rate, and they're fairly cheap. So all the blenders in the US love them. The problem is, and this is one of the parts I really like about the ACEA specs, is that the Bosch test that you're using for shear stability is a little more severe than the Orban test that's used here in the US, which isn't as great. I really like the KRL test the best. But
should I explain the Bosch test? I think that's...
Sure, please, go ahead, yeah.
Just because when you know what you are testing and on what kind of hardware, the test becomes even more stupid and genius at the same time. And I would love to see like an update for the test, because the equipment is very old at the moment, and to get like replacement parts is not the easiest thing in the world. So the idea is you put oil, you want to introduce shear to the oil, like when you have the piston ring and cylinder liner situation where you have a lot of stress in the oil film. You want to artificially introduce that into the oil, and you have like the KRL test on the very famous 4-ball machine. You can run like the test with a tapered roller bearing, which is very, very severe, and that's not the case in the engine situation. So you need something which is
the full 24-hour KRL is too severe. You're right.
And you need something which is less stress inducing. So the idea was, okay, then we put the oil through a diesel injector, but not for passenger car or truck, but for train. So they use like a Bosch diesel injector for a train engine. I don't know which size. And the whole system is built up from you have like a reservoir, a glass tube, and stuff like a cooling agent, and then you have the diesel injector on top, which is spraying out the fuel, the oil into collecting chamber, and then it's cooled down, and then you recycle the whole process. And as a pump, you use a diesel pump from the same train, so it fits the injector, but it is like a two-way pump for two injectors, and that must have been some very, very special equipment from Bosch from 40 years ago or even more, with 2 cylinders, which isn't built anymore and wasn't built for the last century, no, decades at least. And you have it's very difficult to find the pump. The injector is quite common also at some locomotives, but to find the pump with only 2 ports, that's very difficult, and these pumps wear out. So we had to replace some parts of our pump,
Okay.
And we were really struggling to find replacement parts for this specific pump because Bosch isn't building it anymore in Europe or the US. They are building it in India.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's the way it always works, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So and
But
then
that's the thing is that shear stability part is, I
Yeah.
think, is really key. Is that what I see? You can speak to it better than me. Is that the typical ACEA spec approved oil is generally going to use a more shear stable type polymer because of that difference in severity. Also, there are, so like I said, these functionalized viscosity index improvers that also have dispersancy capability, that they can handle the soot, and that makes a big difference, because that gives you that ability as a formulator to deal with the soot that the diesel is creating, so that it doesn't agglomerate and turn into these big chunks and then do damage in the engine. But at the same time, you're not having to rely on detergents and other things like that that could impact catalyst life. So that's where, and those cost more, right? The functionalized OCPs, which is, that's a pretty common thing I think people see, is that here's this Euro spec oil that meets all these things, approvals, and it's a lot more money than this other one that may say you could use it for that. There's a big difference, right? Like, this one really meets it. It's going to cost more money because of that, right?
I would say if you try to use like an OCP viscosity index improver in like for a 5W30 formulation, and you test it against ACEA oil spec for shear stability after test, it would catastrophically fail.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So if you can talk a little about the approval process, right? Because we kind of went through this as all these different specs. We kind of understand why they're different, but we'll come back to this in a minute. I feel like this part is something that is widely misunderstood. That it's pretty easy to go find an oil that has the actual approvals on it, but sometimes it's not clear that the marketer, sometimes the distinctions can be kind of vague. So what is the difference between formal approval and suitable for use? What does that mean?
I think about where to start. Maybe we tackle it from this side. You have in the API, you have like a formal approval process for this donut or the starburst symbol on the bottle. You have to give the API some kind of sample, let it had it be tested. All the results have to be checked, and then you get a formal approval, and you can print the starburst or the donut onto your bottle of oil, kind of that. There is no guardrails, as I can imagine, if you just put API SP meets requirements and sell the bottle to Asia.
Right.
Kind of. So that's mainly how the OEM approvals in Europe will work. So, for example, you go to Mercedes and you say, I want my oil to be approved for 229.52, which is diesel spec, quite modern. Okay, go for it. So Mercedes will tell you, okay, the oil must meet this and this and this and this specifications. You get a list, you get technical data, you get technical physical data, you can test it in the lab, and then you get a whole bunch of engine tests. Most of them will always be tested in the ACEA sequence, and then Mercedes will slap on some additional tests.
Right. Specific to their hardware. Like they may have some very specific piece they want to hit.
Or they say, yeah, well, you've done the ACEA test on the VW engine. That's nice, but now you have to run the same test on our Mercedes engine, kind of this. And when you pass all the tests, they will give you an approval letter and you get your approval. The other way is you have like an approved formulation, which is kind of known in the industry, that the additive supplier and the base oil suppliers have interchanged something and they've created this specific formulation. And you buy the additive and you buy the base oils and you buy all the components and you get like a reblend formulation. So then you can skip a whole lot of the approval process, like all the engine testing, which are very expensive to do.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So nevertheless, you have to provide like the basic physical and chemical data. You have to do some lab testing. And if you change too much, you have to also go to some engine testing. And after that, Mercedes will say, okay, approved. And they will put it on their website, and they have like a very large list for all their approvals, where you can track which products are approved by Mercedes themselves. That's the official way. And then you can say, okay, I'm not committed enough to go to Mercedes and try to get their approval. I would say.
Now we're on this slide.
Yeah. So you may use like an additive which is maybe too new, as it is not tested in older equipment, for example. That would be the classical case. You have like a modern formulation and you want to have like an old specification claim, which the modern additives are not tested for. And no one would pay the price to test it on the older equipment because it's what for?
So some of those tests don't exist anymore, right? Like, so you can't even run those tests, so you
like
can't have formal approval because that engine doesn't even exist to be tested anymore.
Yeah. And that's where you would put meet requirements, because you can assure it performs well on newer hardware, so it must be like downwards compatible, kind of, we guess.
Yeah,
I would say so.
Yeah, and I think sometimes too, this is a little inside baseball, but I know the people that watch this, they appreciate inside baseball sometimes. That, like you said, there could be an additive package that would, we'll call it base oil A, it would be have formal approval because it's already passed everything. But say, for example, and we'll get back to this in a little bit, folks, a group 3, there's no base oil interchange amongst group 3 base oils. There is base oil interchange amongst some group 1s and group 2s, but not group 3. So maybe we'll call it, blender Y has been using, this a South Korean base oil that doesn't have formal approval, but it's a group 3. We have an additive package that has formal approval. I'm just going to use this base oil with this additive, and I'm going to say that it meets the requirements because I don't have formal approval because my base oil has never passed. It's because of no interchange, but I'm confident as the manufacturer of the oil that it will work because I'm using a good additive package and my base oil is close enough. And that happens sometimes too.
Yeah, that would be totally normal. Yeah, totally.
Quite common, I would also say.
Well, you mentioned it earlier about the oils in Asia. I think there's a lot of oils in Asia that are that way, right?
Kind of. That's the weird part. It's sometimes difficult to get like formal approvals in Asia,
right?
For the Asian manufacturer, it is possible, but they have like a first filler and the retailer, and so it's a difficult process to get into that formal approval. But it's known what they tested and what they want to have tested. And when you think about it, you have like a formulation which is approved for API, for example, or for ACEA C3 category, and which has a formal approval for BMW, VW. And you see the tests, and you can match the testing equipment severity of the test with the engine test done by Toyota or something.
Right.
Yeah, that's not tested, so you can't put a formal approval on it, and Toyota hasn't tested the sample, so you can't have a formal approval. But you can be confident that the sample will not damage the engine, and it will just work fine. That would be suitable for use, meets requirements.
Right.
I would say.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I feel like there's different cases for this, right? Sometimes it is where people are using that technology that's similar for it. I think there's other times when they're using different base oils. Like the perfect example would be, I'll speak to it, right? So if I take like an Afton additive package that at say 10% treat rate with the appropriate base oil and viscosity index improver could be, Dexos 1 Gen 3 licensed. But if I put that in a PAO ester base oil blend, I can't license that product unless I go to GM and do all the testing. Well, as a small marketer, I can't do that. That'll never happen. So all I can do is say suitable for use, right?
Yeah. And I would also say maybe when you go to to GM and say, okay, that's what I'm going for. That's what I've planned. And I would say, okay, you don't have to do all the engine tests. But here are some which are very important and may fail. You have to do them. You are still talking about an invest of at least $1 million, I would say.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
Just to get it tested.
Yeah.
And that's just one testing run. You can still, so we've seen on very, very expensive testing rigs that you can perform tests like 4 or 5 times and get 4 or 5 different final results.
Yep.
So you have to do the test at least twice, I would say, maybe 3 times. And that's very, very, Kalyan, if I say I have a product and the upfront costs of this product are $2.5 million, would you be able to make a profit in the next 2 years?
It depends on the spec of the market, but yeah, it would put a lot of pressure on me.
Very small market, very niche car.
Yeah.
Go for it.
If
It's
it's
not
too
gonna
niche,
happen,
of course
right?
not.
Yeah.
If it is a quite common spec, it makes sense.
Yeah.
If you talk like half of the fleet of all of Europe, go for it. That's no problem. We will do that. But if you talk like, okay, 5 people in Germany are driving this car and my whole market is in Germany, that's not gonna happen.
It's never gonna work. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's the key thing is for everybody to understand is that these are real key technical definitions that people run into, quite often, right? I think it's becoming more and more common, just because, like you said, some of these engines are harder to come by in terms of for testing. So it becomes a little bit, well, what does all of this actually mean? And I thought this part was pretty interesting too, that we'll call it the chain of custody, like how everything flows was very interesting because it's very different in terms of the focus between how API, we'll call it, administrates their program versus how ACEA, the Europeans administrate their program, how it regulates. Can you kind of elaborate on that for a little bit?
As I said, you have like for the API, you have, as it's written there, you have to focus on testing and licensing. So everything you want to have the official approval from the API, you have to go through the testing. ACEA works a little bit different. It's normally like a self-certifying system, I would say, like a framework.
Yeah.
You are allowed to change the formulation as you wish. You just have to do all of the read across, interchange. So there are guardrails in which you can pretty much not really do what you want, but do certain things in this guardrail. And when you go beyond, you have to go through rigorous testing again. In the API, it's more like before you market it, go through our testing. For ACEA, it's more like, yeah, go for it. And we will collect samples out of the market and see if you cheated or not. And they are doing that right now.
Okay.
It's the same on the API side. They also do it. But the licensing
they
program,
monitor, yeah.
but not with not licensed products. So if your product is not licensed from the API would not severely
Ever check
test
it.
you out of the market, I would say.
Yeah.
In Europe, it's different. If you claim ACEA C3 and the ACEA
Even not as a listing, you mean?
Yeah. And you get tested, and the ACEA sees, okay, that's bullshit what you claim, then you have a problem. Definitely.
So you better not claim it if you really can't back it up.
Yeah.
Right, and see that, and that's the case in the U.S., right? You can claim certain stuff, and they'll probably never check you, and there's really not a lot of punishment if you don't.
For the US customers, I would say if you buy API spec products, just watch out for the donut and the ILSAC starburst and shield symbol.
Yeah.
Because that means the products have been tested and licensed by the API, and misbehavior from the blender or from the producer is punishable by the API. Yeah. If it's just a claim, everything can claim I do API SN.
Tell me if you think this is a fair analogy. Well, when we were looking through this stuff and preparing for today, it kind of hit me that the GM Dexos spec feels more like what you're seeing with that next level that you can get from, say, a Mercedes or a VW spec, where there's this base API spec that will provide this level of protection, and it has these things. But like, for example, with Dexos, and just I happen to know this one, so you can pass API SP with a given additive package, a given base oil, with a 50 SSI, that's shear stability index, folks, polymer. So the higher the number in shear stability, the less stable it is. Which is always, I don't know why people come up with these ways. It's like the most counterintuitive ways of describing things. Sure. So a lower shear stability polymer, in terms of its ability to stay in grade, will pass API SP. But if I go to a 35 SSI polymer, I don't change anything else, but just go to 35 SSI, now I'm more shear stable. Now I can pass the Dexos spec, because it's literally it's so close on the edge. And I feel like that's where because I know it's been asked in the comments sometimes, this is where some of these very particular OEM specs come in, is that they have very specific like HTHS requirements. So I'm just making this up off the top of my head, because I don't remember all the limits with each viscosity grade on a Saturday morning right now. So I know there are some European OEM specs that may say it has to be a minimum 3.4 HTHS, right? Or maybe a 3.5, right? Where maybe for that viscosity grade, the actual SAE minimum is lower than that, but they want a very specific minimum. It's that same kind of approach, right?
Yeah, I have one similar example, I would say, when we focus on like one specific parameter. Mm-hmm. When you look up for like the ACEA C3 specification, you have a threshold for evaporation loss, NOAC, for the NOAC evaporation loss. The ACEA says 13 maximum. And now you want to go ahead and make an approval with Mercedes for newer diesel spec. Then Mercedes will say, yeah, 13 is great, but I want 10. And it's also the other way around. 10 is better than 13, less loss.
Yeah.
And And then Mercedes also will say, okay, you've done 30 cycles on the Bosch injector test for shear stability. That's not enough for our spec. We will do 90. Like for the big trucks. That's quite common for big trucks and Mercedes.
Yep. Right. Yeah.
So
I think that's the difference, right? Is it do people ask the question? And I get the questions all the time about, well, do I really have to use that spec? And the reality is, the other oil may seem very similar, but there's a reason they do these things.
Yeah, and it might also kind of work for a certain time, but the manufacturer tries to make sure that the life cycle, which is planned for the car or for the engine, in combination with the oil, is a functioning system. So when you decide to change the oil as a component of the system, you will risk the lifespan of your system, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. You're definitely taking a risk, right? And unless you're testing, you don't know.
Yeah.
Like if you're testing and you see that, hey, I'm using this other product instead, and my results are great, then you don't know, right? If you're doing that, fantastic. Follow the data. The data is not going to lead you to the wrong place. But if you're not doing that, then you're blindly trusting, and that's going to probably get you in trouble more times than not. Yeah. So I promise we would get back to this, because I know this is something that people ask all the time, and you guys can speak to this more directly than anybody else. So, and we have a whole video that we've actually done on this. That, synthetic oil is a marketing term in the U.S., right? And there's a whole bunch of different types. What I found interesting, because we covered all these things in that video. If you guys haven't watched that before, I'll leave a link for that in the description box below when we publish this as a full video. That yes, there's PAOs, there's esters, there's alkylated naphthalenes. Those are what most people call a true synthetic. And on the US, you can't tell from the label in the US, right? There are some products that say 100% synthetic that are actually hydrocracked in the US. Then there's some that say full synthetic, but people think, oh, that means it's hydrocracked, that are actually PAO ester. You can go into Walmart and they're side by side from the same brand, right? One's hydrocracked and one's PAO synthetic. And if you're not doing the oil analysis, you'll never know, because you can't see the IR trace, right? The IR trace tells you what the heck's in there.
Even when you do this and you just do an IR scan of the whole thing, you wouldn't see clear evidence that it's just group 3. I would say. See, a lot of IR scans.
Yeah.
So you need to go on the what's it called? Gas chromatography, GP.
Oh yeah, GC. Yeah, if you got GC.
GC. Yeah. So you have to use this, and this method is a little bit more complicated than a quick IR scan, I would say. But there you would see it clearly. not
I always figure this, like if it actually has PAO in it, more times than not, if it has a substantial amount of PAO in it, then it's going to have some ester. So when I look at the IR, I'm just looking for the ester spikes, right? I'm like, oh, if there's ester in there, or the AN's got this little hump, I'm like, if I find those, then I know, okay, right. You're not doing that with the group 3 by itself. Typically, right? I mean, you could, but it's like, who's going to do that?
Yeah, that's what I want to say. Yeah, you could do group 3 with ester, but why would you? That's not really a point in doing.
No.
So yeah, that would be viable to look for the ester peak.
That's how I do it. That's how I kind of go about figuring out which one's which. I go look at the ester peaks and try to find that and back into it. Like you said, you really can't tell anything else other than a GC. And maybe one day we'll have enough subscribers that I could go buy a GC. We can really have some fun. But right now I don't have that.
we haven't one in our lab either. We have just for metal content we have X-ray.
Yeah.
The next step would be GC or ICP. But let's see.
And we got all the basic used oil analysis stuff to cover pretty good. But like the real analytical stuff. Yeah, my buddy Peter Lee at Southwest Research, they've got one. I'm like, every time I'm down there, I want to go in there and, hey, let's play with that,
Can imagine that.
No, but just talk through the terms here real quick, because I thought that was interesting, because I've seen some of your product labeling, and I didn't know what these terms are, because obviously I don't speak German, so I'll let you guys explain what these mean.
Koyan.
Yeah. Voll synthetic, the first term. What you see here is fully synthetic. We have a little disadvantage here in Germany from the marketing side, because we are only allowed to claim products made from Group 4 and Group 5 as fully synthetic. So everything which is based on hydrocrack base oils, we need to market as synthetic. And tile synthetic, which means semi-synthetic, is usually the blend of Group 1, 2 with Group 3 and 4. And in Germany, we unfortunately have a little stricter rules here how to market our products, and you can also see this clearly if you compare some products. When you go on the German website from some specific product, you see HC synthetic or just synthetic, exactly the same product from the same brand, same name, same specs. On a Spanish website, or on a French website, or on a US website says fully synthetic. Yeah, this gives us at least a little disadvantages in marketing. It is exactly the same product, but we as a German company, we try to market it worldwide the same. So if
same thing.
Yeah, if the US customers, if the US customers see a Ravenol product claiming fully synthetic, it is really PRO and ester based. While from other US brands, it could be hydrocrack based. Yeah.
In my limited experience with y'all's products, it says on the label PAO ester, right? And then
at least in the technical
IR says it's PAO ester as well. So I'm like, okay, you guys don't lie, which is nice, right?
You can also see it often in the technical values and the technical data. If on pour point and values,
it's pretty clear. Yeah, it's pretty clear. Yeah,
I would say. So the reason for all of this in Germany was one lawsuit. One.
Yeah. And it was finally 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. And there was a debate between two. I don't really know the case, between like blender and customer or something like that. And then one judge or a couple of judges, I don't really know. I have to look it up. But it was one lawsuit and settled the whole thing and said, okay, the term voll synthetisch in German is legally defined now.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's the way it goes, right? Same thing. One lawsuit here is what kind of cracked the door open there, right? Of course, the irony of that was, Castrol, when they did Syntec initially, they were buying their base oil from ExxonMobil. Then, of course, Mobil only sued them when they stopped buying base oil from them.
Sure.
Man. Awesome. Well, I can't thank you guys enough for coming and hanging out this morning and going over all these things. I think it's been a lot of fun. I'm really sorry for everybody in the chat, right? We started talking about fuel and I completely derailed you guys on fuel conversation over here. We're talking about oil. I think they're having some fun over there talking about top tier fuel. Fresh fuel is better, right? Just my 2 cents. I've kind of watched this, but tried to stay on track. Fresh fuel is better for certain. And the higher the additive content in the fuel, typically the better it's going to do too. So just know that. But you guys have any last thoughts, parting comments, words you'd like to share?
Yeah, from my side, I would like to mention again that our US distributor is currently also looking for sub-distributors all over the US. So if anybody from your audience is who's listening right now and who's looking for a new oil supplier or want to become part of our network, he shall please go on ravenol-us.com and approach us. So that'd
be fantastic. Yeah, because that's one of the things. Like it's I know supply, being able to access an oil is always a trick. Now, the great thing is, Amazon makes life super, super easy, right? Well, it's like, it's just go on there and just buy something. It just shows up a couple days later. It's pretty nice, but that's the way it goes. So again, thank you guys so much for coming, hanging out. Thanks everybody for coming this morning. Really enjoyed it. So I can tell one thing from all of this conversation about fuels. Hang on, because my buddy Chip Hewitt that used to work for Aston did a bunch of fuel testing. I'm going to get Chip on and we'll do a video. We can post that about fuel. So again, thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate you guys for coming, hanging out, and we'll see you guys next time. All right. Bye.
Thanks for having us, Blake. Have a good one.
All right. All right. Y'all hang out here.